Question 8. What is the value of the expression -8 ninths divided by -2 thirds times -4 1/2? Is it A, -6, B, -8 27ths, C, 8 27ths, D, 6? The answer choices are actually underneath where the sample problem is. If you're not entirely sure how to solve this problem, there were a lot of scholars that had some struggles with remembering integer rules. So when you have positive and negative numbers, and then also remembering to use when and how to use keep, change, flip. So our keyword is value, so that means that we want to solve. And then remember, these numbers here are different than your actual problem. So when you're writing this down on paper and you're solving it, you have this here and you're using these numbers, but this is just the sample problem to make sure that you're setting it up the right way. So the sample problem has -7/12 divided by -2 1/4 times a -4 6. So one of the first steps that we had to do was make sure that this was also an improper fraction, because it's difficult to multiply when you have the mixed numbers. So they had to make it an improper fraction, making sure that we still left those integer signs that were there. And then we had keep, change, flip. So if we took this regular problem, we had to keep this -7/12, change the division to a multiplication, and then flip our fraction from -9/4 to -4 ninths. When you multiply that across, remember, for multiplying fractions, you just multiply across. You ended up with 28 100ths. The side note here is two negative numbers make a positive when you multiply or divide. So we had two negative numbers, but remember, a negative times a negative is a positive, which is why this is now a positive number. Now we still have another part of our expression that we need to make sure that we're including. So we bring it all the way down, and the operation up here is a multiplication. So we have multiplication that's here. And scholars remember that for multiplication, we do not have to keep, change, flip. We only keep, change, flip when we are dividing fractions. So this just gets to stay the same. So we have 28 times a -4. And then 108 times 6. Now remember, when we have this here, this is just like one of these values is negative, which is why that is like a negative that's there. It's also the same as like a -1 times the 4/6. So when we are multiplying all of that, it would be 28 times 4 and 108 times 6 times all of that is times a -1. So we have where we've simplified it, so we have a -112 divided by a 648 is equal to -14/81. Remember, a positive number that we have here multiplied times a negative number is a negative number. When you multiply or divide a positive times a negative, it is negative. If you multiply or divide by two negatives or two positives, it's positive. Remember that. Don't let it get you stuck or tricked out when you're working up here. There are answers that you can look at and just slash the trash right away. Question 9. Multiply 1 3/7 times -3/7. Think about, how are you going to set up this problem? Do we need to keep, change, flip if it's a multiplication sign? If you forget, you can look at the sample problem up here. Did we keep, change, flip when it's a multiplication sign? Also make sure that up here when we had the mixed number, what did we have to do with the mixed number? We made it improper. Set up your problem, solve. Is it A, -4 2/7, B, -2 2/7, C, -30 49ths, or D, 1? Question 10. George earns $450 per week. If George receives a 20% raise, so think that's our increase, how can George calculate his new weekly pay rate? Select all calculations that will result in George's new weekly pay rate. Would we be able to calculate his new weekly pay rate by dividing 455 by 0.2? B, divide 455 by 1.2. Multiply 455 by 0.2. Multiply 455 by 1.2. E, solve for x. And you have x over 455 is equal to 120 over 100. Or F, solve for x, 455 over x is equal to 20 over 100. And then make sure you have it here. This problem could have more than one answer. It could be one or more than one because it says all. Question 11. Dory can run 3.25 miles every hour. How many hours will it take her to run a race that is 16 1/4 miles long? Think about how are you setting this problem up. It's kind of similar to our scuba diving problem that we had yesterday. So make sure you're setting up your proportions the correct way. Think about what are we solving for. So what should our x be? Question 12. A number line is shown below. The numbers 0 and 1 are marked in the line, as are two other numbers, A and B. So take a look at the number line here. If you have 0 and you have 1, A, think about what is its relationship to 0 and 1, and then you have B. Think about its relationship to 0 as well. Which of the following numbers is negative? Choose all that apply. A minus 1, B, A minus 2, C, negative B, D, A plus B. Solve. Negative 0.5 times 5/3 equals A, negative 25/3, B, negative 5/6, C, 5/6, D, 25/3. Remember your integer rules because that will help you slash the trash right away. Here's the end of our Tuesday pacing suggestion. I'm going to continue reading on in another video for questions 14 through 19.